There's a saying in non-duality circles, which was popularized by A Course in Miracles, which states that all questions are of the ego. It's quite a radical understanding, I know, and yet the more honest we are with ourselves regarding our actual experience of life, the more that we can see that every question we have, whether it's a spiritual question or not, whether it touches on metaphysics or practice or something to do with the practical relative world, all of those questions come with a presupposition of separation. Because in order to ask a question, you have to make a reference to linear time. In order to ask a question, you have to work with inherently imperfect tools. Tools that are dependent on the so-called relative world to exist. In other words, questions of any caliber necessarily assume that you are working beneath the framework of some fundamental limitation. Because if there were no limitations, there would not be a need to know. There would not be a need to pick apart or analyze things because there would be nothing to pick apart and analyze in the first place. And so, I'm saying all this because I've found in my own experience that the spiritual search is not a search for any particular thing. It's not even the answer to any particular question, but rather it is an unending simplification in the sense that the deeper and deeper I go into self-honesty, into authentic self-expression, the more I can see that all of these little metaphysical and spiritual questions, which I took to be so important, do not touch my actual raw experience of life in any capacity, aside from the power that I give it. The power that was never really in that supposed question or object of inquiry in the first place, but was entirely a function of myself. The more authentic you get with yourself, the more you see that every question you could possibly ask assumes that there is a problem you have to solve. Because by asking a question, you are validating the delusion that there is a particular understanding that you have to capture, that you have to hold on to. It's that proverbial question then. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Do you want an answer to one question just for another to pop up a few minutes later? Do you want to keep playing emotional whack-a-mole with yourself for incarnations upon incarnations? Or are you willing to let go of the need to manipulate and pick apart all of these experiences that come from and are a function of yourself? Everyone has a unique way that they express themselves. If you are to speak in these terms, everybody has a unique frequency. And you don't need to ask questions to know what that is. You have an intuitive sense of yourself before any words leave your mouth. You have a whole aggregate of experiences and understandings with which you approach every circumstance in your life. You have a whole perspective, both an intuitive perspective as well as a spoken one, much like myself with these words right now. You bring such a value to every interaction. You are the value. The fewer questions you have, the deeper and deeper your understanding of yourself goes. And the more your own love, the natural capacity of your being, blossoms. And I know it's really easy to be sitting behind the camera and just be saying, like, you don't need to ask questions. It's all right here. Let life be your teacher. Because, like, you know, I've asked a lot of questions throughout my life. I still sometimes ask questions, right? And when I do, I catch that, like, okay, I'm operating on behalf of the finite thinking mind rather than the truest version of myself. But yet there is, like, still that, like, impulse, right, to ask a question. So I don't want to spiritually bypass this either. if you feel like there is an inquiry that is just burning within you, there is a question, if you will, that you feel some natural gravity towards exploring, that's fine. I'm not saying that you can't ask questions or that you shouldn't ask questions. You can do what the fuck you want. You're not gonna, like, actually separate from God, and you know that. Excuse me. Yet, like, it's good to keep in mind that whenever you, like, not just whenever you ask a question, but whenever you really, really become desperate for an answer, when you go from teacher to teacher, or when you do practice upon practice, or when you read fucking spiritual books or whatever, like, you have to be careful, because it's very easy to reinforce this expectation that one day, somewhere in the future, this understanding is just going to click, that you're going to achieve some spiritual state, and then all the questions are going to be gone, and everything's going to be roses, 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 and, like, yeah, everything is roses, 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 but, like, you don't have to be so desperate for answers. And I know what that desperation feels like. The first year I got into any of this stuff, I mean, I was just, my ex will tell you, I was just hammering those questions, man. And, like, it was really jarring when there was a question that, like, that had an answer that wasn't satisfying to me. And it really was a game of whack-a-mole. I found myself constantly butting up against this impenetrable wall of understanding, where on one side there is the delusional thinking mind that operates on the terms of separation, and on the other there is undistorted truth. Distortion and truth, even though they're ultimately the same thing, in a metaphorical sense, never actually touch each other. The only way that you will arrive at any substantive understanding of yourself through the mind is through the emerging understanding of the futility of the mind to give you any satisfaction. So, like, when people say, let life be your teacher, all they're saying is that it's okay to drop the need to label every little experience. It's okay to drop the categorizations and the rationalization and the storytelling, which is what the mind is. Not just what the mind does, but what the mind is. If I hear a bird chirp, I don't have to label it or think of it as enjoyable or not enjoyable. If I drop a cup on the floor, the sight of it shattering, the sound of the glass spreading everywhere. If I just let those things happen on their own terms, that is how the apparently separate self dissolves. That is how you develop a real clear seeing of yourself, of your no self. By just letting those questions pass by like little subtitles in a movie. Over and over and over and over again. Getting better and better at catching yourself on your shit. So, look, as someone who's asked a million questions and has frustrated themselves to no fucking end, let me tell you, the mind is going to go in circles forever. And you can either continue indulging in that cycle, or you can allow yourself to not know and allow happiness to flourish beneath that. You can simply enjoy the healing. And that's entirely your choice. And either choice is fine. But one of those choices is going to be more efficient at arriving at a stable sense of joy, which doesn't need a cause, which has no reference to linear time or a self who carries that joy, but is simply there, is simply so palpable, so real, and so fundamental to you that you don't need to ask a question. You don't even need to speak. Peace, love, It just is.